Blender is a 3D computer graphics software used for creating animated films, visual effects, art, 3D assets for games, and much more. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to get started. If you already have Blender installed, you can skip ahead to. If not, go to blender.org. You can search it up on Google or use the link in the description below. Click download and then click the big blue button in the middle of the screen. If you're using Mac or Linux, there's an option for that too. After the installer is downloaded, open the installer and click through the steps. Once it's finished, open up Blender. When you open Blender, you'll be met with a splash screen. On the bottom here, we can open a file, and above that, we have the option of creating a new file using one of these templates. For this video, we'll be using the general option, so click that and the splash screen should close. Before we do anything, make sure you have a keyboard and mouse. The mouse should have a left button, a right button, and a scroll wheel that you can press down on, like a button. That's what we'll be using for this tutorial. However, you can also use a trackpad for Blender, but trust me, you don't want to do that. Now let's take a look at this UI. And I know what you're thinking, what the f***? Look, first of all, what's your language, mate? Second of all, don't worry. Blender can look daunting at first, but it's not as tough as it looks. This mess you're looking at here can be broken down into 3 parts. The top bar, the main workspace, and the status bar. The central and most important part of the view, the workspace, is made up of a lot of different boxes called areas. Each area is an editor which has a specific function which we'll learn about more as we go along. The default Blender project will have 4 areas in the workspace. This area here is called the 3D viewport and is the most important area to look at as it contains a scene with all the objects. If you look at the bottom left of my 3D viewport, you'll see this mouse icon and keys randomly pop up. You will not have this on your Blender. Don't panic. This is an add-on I'm using so that you can see what keys I'm pressing. The area below the 3D viewport is called the animation timeline and is used for animating objects. This area at the top right hand corner is called the outliner and displays some of the different objects in the scene. And this area on the right below the outliner is called the properties editor and is used to edit the different properties of different objects. We'll go more into depth about these areas in a bit. If you'd like to change an area, you can click this button here, which is in the top left hand corner of each area. Then, select the area type you would like to change it to. If you'd like to change the size of the areas, you can click and drag from the sides. If you'd like to open a new window, bring your mouse to the corner and wait for this cross icon to appear, and then you can click and drag out to create a new area. If you want to close an area, go to the corner of an area adjacent to the area you want to close, and wait for the cross icon again. Then click the left mouse button, hold and drag towards the area that you want to close. An arrow pointing in the direction of the area that you want to close should appear. Once that arrow appears, release the left mouse button. For example, if you want to close the animation player down the bottom, we can drag from the corner of the 3D viewport down onto it, which we will do since animation isn't something we'll be covering in this tutorial. Above the workspace is the top bar. The top bar has a range of different menus. The important ones to know is the file menu here, which can be used to create a new file, open an existing file, and save the current file. The edit menu, which has undo, redo, and preferences, which you can use to change shortcuts or add add-ons. Add-ons simply extend Blender's functionality. For example, I have an add-on to show you what keys I'm pressing. Then we have the render menu, which is for rendering the 3D scene, meaning turning this scene into either an image or an animation, and the window menu here, which can be used to go full screen or create a new window for the same project. And over here next to the menus, we have the different workspaces, which have different area setups for different tasks that you can do in Blender, like animation or sculpting. Down the bottom, the status bar shows us what's going on. It shows us useful information about what we're doing and tips on what we can do next. Now, let's look at the big area here called the 3D viewport. This is where we'll be doing most of our work in. In the 3D viewport, you can see a few different objects. If you left mouse button click on one of the objects, they'll be highlighted yellow. And if you right click, it will bring up the object menu. We will be using this more later. If you hold shift while selecting objects, you can select multiple objects. Alternatively, you can click and drag with the left mouse button to box select multiple objects. Or, if you want to select all the objects, press A, and then double press A again to deselect all the objects. Now let's take a look at the objects in this scene. Here we have our cube, and then over here we have a camera. This is what is used to frame the scene when we render the image or animation. Then we have the light, which is used when rendering. To render the image, press F12, and then your computer should show you an image like the one on my screen. This is the final render taken from the view of the camera using the light as lighting. To rotate your view in the 3D viewport, hold down the middle mouse button and move the mouse or click and drag on the navigation gizmo on the top right. This will change the rotation around your invisible center point. To change your center point, you can hold Shift and the scroll button and move the mouse to pan around. Or you can press the full stop, or if you're American, the period button on the numpad, and it will recenter the point on whatever you selected. If you don't have a numpad, click on View here and click on Frame Selected. You can also right click on this and select Change Shortcut to change the shortcut key. If you scroll, it will zoom in and out on your center point. If you press Ctrl, hold the middle mouse button and drag the mouse, it will zoom in and out more smoothly. If you go under the navigation gizmo, you will see these buttons.
The top one is for zooming in and out.
By clicking and holding on the button and then dragging the mouse around. Doing the same thing to the button below the zoom button will pan around like we did before. And the button below that will toggle the camera view, which we can also do by pressing 0 on the numpad. This last button here will turn the orthographic view on and off. Orthographic view takes our perspective and kind of makes it look 2D-ish. You can also click these balls here on the gizmo to toggle orthographic view at a specific angle, or alternatively, use the 7, 9, 1 and 3 keys on your numpad. Over here on our left, we can see our toolbar for transforming the objects in the scene. As you can see, we are currently using the select tool. Below the select tool is the cursor tool. If we select this and then click anywhere in the scene, you will see that this little circle will move to where we just clicked. This is our 3D cursor. The shortcut to moving the 3D cursor is simply holding Shift and then right clicking on the screen. The cursor is used as a center point for adding new objects into the scene, which we will preview in a little bit. But first, below the cursor button is the move button. If we select it, we can move the object around using these arrows to keep it on the axis, or freely moving it by clicking and dragging within the white circle. The shortcut to this is by pressing G. You can then press X, Y, or Z to lock it onto the respective axis. Once you've made an action, if you aren't happy with it, pressing Ctrl Z will undo your latest action, and pressing Shift Ctrl Z will redo the action. Below the Move button, you'll find the Rotation tool. This tool allows you to rotate objects around their pivot point. Once selected, you can click and drag on the colored arcs that represent the X, Y, and Z axes to rotate the object accordingly. The shortcut to doing this is by using the R key and the X, Y, and Z keys to lock onto a specific axis similar to the Move tool. If you double tap it, it will rotate a bit like a trackball. Similarly, next to the Rotation tool, you'll find the Scale tool. As the name suggests, this tool lets you resize objects. Clicking and dragging on the colored handles allows you to uniformly scale the objects on different axes, while dragging on the white central handle enables non-uniform scaling. The shortcut to this is by pressing the S key, and again using the X, Y, and Z keys if you would like to scale it along a specific axis. Another thing we can do in the viewport is add an object. To add a new object onto the scene, simply click on the Add menu or press Shift plus A and then select the item you want to add in. You can add all sorts of objects in, but for now, we'll just add in a monkey for demonstration purposes, which we can select by going to the Mesh sub-menu and clicking on the monkey. As you can see, the monkey was added and its center point is where our 3D cursor is, just like we talked about before. To delete the monkey, we can right click on it while it's selected and click delete. Alternatively, we can simply press X and confirm delete. Now let's take a look at this area over here. This area is called the outliner, and it's used to show what objects are in the scene. If we add our monkey back in by pressing Ctrl Z, you will see her name show up in the outliner, Suzanne. Apparently this monkey is named after a monkey from some Kevin Smith movies. But let's say we want to rename our monkey as George. We can do this by double clicking on the name and then typing in George. Now, let's say we want to work on our cube, but George was getting in the way and we couldn't see the cube properly. Well, we can actually hide George by clicking the eye icon next to his name. Now we can see our cube better. Let's add another monkey. Now we have two monkeys, George and Suzanne. But what if we wanted to hide them both at the same time? Well, we could go into the outliner and manually hide both. And while this is easy when there's only a few objects in the scene, when you're creating complex scenes with many objects, this can get very tedious very quickly. So, the quick and easy solution to this is something called collections. To make a new collection in the outliner, simply right-click and click New Collection. Let's rename this collection to Monkeys. And then drag in Suzanne and George. Cool, now we have our monkeys collection. If we wanted to hide these monkeys, we can just simply click on the I button on the collection. You can also select all the objects in a collection by selecting one object and then pressing Shift plus G. Now, let's get rid of these monkeys.
Now, what if we want to change our cube, add some complex geometry to it, maybe transform it into a building, or a hat, or a car? To do this, we'll need to go into Edit Mode. Edit Mode will allow us to edit the actual shape of a mesh. So, select the cube, click on the drop down in the top left hand corner that says Object Mode, and then click on Edit Mode. Whoa, 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 whoa. We made it, guys. We're in Edit Mode. The main change you'll notice now that we're in Edit Mode is that our cube is highlighted orange and the corners have orange dots over them. Also, our toolbar on the left has gained all these new options. You might also notice that this top part has added some options as well.
Let's first take a look at the changes to the cube. These dots on each corner that you can see are called vertices. The cube is a mesh. Each mesh is made up of vertices and edges and faces that connect these vertices to each other. The monkey is a mesh as well. If you take a look at our cube, you'll notice that it has 8 vertices, 12 edges, and 6 faces. If you would like to check how many of these you have without having to manually count, you can go to the top right corner, click this drop down, and select the checkbox for statistics. This can be useful when you have complex models and you're trying to keep the vertex count to a minimum for performance reasons. Now our cube is highlighted orange because we have all our vertices selected. If we would like to select an individual vertex, we can click on the vertex we want to select, and if we want to select multiple, we can simply shift and then click. If you would like to select all again, press A and double tap A to deselect all. If you would like to select an edge, you can select the 2 vertices at either side that make up the edge. However, a much more efficient way is to go into the Edge Select mode. Currently, we are in Vertex Select mode, so if you want to go into Edge Select mode, go to the top left corner and select this button here that says Edge Selection mode. Now, we are in Edge Select mode and can select edges instead of vertices. We can also do this for faces, and if we go select a face in Face Select mode and then go back to Vertex Select mode, you'll notice that all the vertices attached to the face are now selected in Vertex Select mode. Now let's take a look at what you can do with this geometry. First, let's go over the basics. If you select a vertex, edge, or face, you can move it by using the same shortcuts as we used in Object Mode. G for grab, and the X, Y, and Z keys for the respective axis you want to move it on. The same goes for scale using the S key and rotate using the R key. Obviously, rotating and scaling vertices won't do anything since they are technically just a point in space. Another thing we can do here is use the editing tools from the toolbar. There are quite a few different tools, so we're just going to quickly go over the most commonly used ones. However, feel free to experiment with all of them. Before we start using these tools, I'm going to drag this toolbar out a bit so you can better see their names. The first tool that you can use, and one that I use all the time, is called the Extrude tool. This tool is very useful for creating new geometry. To use the Extrude tool, select the tool from the toolbar, the one called Extrude Region, click on a vertex, edge, or face that you want to extrude from, and then click and drag this yellow gizmo. This will drag the extrusion in a straight line from the normal angle of the vertex or face. Since our face is flat on the X and Y axis, it will drag directly upwards or downwards on the Z axis. If you would like to extrude on a different angle, you can click and drag on the white circle here. This allows you to extrude out or inwards at any angle you would like. However, I would be very cautious when doing this, as it can extrude out at awkward angles and sometimes ones that you don't want. Extrusions also work when multiple faces are selected. The normal will be calculated using all the faces. The shortcut to extruding is by tapping E and then clicking when you are finished. The next tool we'll be looking at is the Inset tool. This basically creates a smaller face within a face and can be used by selecting a face and then clicking and dragging the circle inwards. The shortcut for this is by tapping I. Inset faces, along with the Extrude tool, can be useful for creating frames or holes. The Bevel tool will allow you to create rounded edges in a model. For example, on this cube. You can use it on multiple sides at once as well. The shortcut for Bevel is Ctrl+B. The loop cut works by creating a loop around the mesh by intersecting the chosen edge. To use the loop cut, select it from the toolbar or press Ctrl+R and then hover over where you would like to make the cut. If you'd like to make multiple cuts, scroll the mouse wheel up to increase the number of cuts. This will only work when you're using the Ctrl+R shortcut. When you are ready to make the cut, simply left click. If you would like to slightly alter the position of the cut, click and drag to where you would like the cut to be positioned and then release.
You could use the Loop Cut tool and the Extrude tool to make some stairs.
The Knife tool is used to slice up geometry by drawing lines or loops to create holes. To use the Knife tool, either select it from the toolbar or press K to start your cut. Click and then click again when you want to create a new point in your cut. Add as many points as you like and then press Enter. If you want to cut the whole way through the mesh, press C when adding a point. Now, the final tool I'll show you is the Edge Slide. To use the Edge Slide, you'll need to be in Edge Select mode. Once you're in Edge Select mode and you have the Edge Slide tool selected, simply select an edge and drag it to move it along the shape. You can slide the edge all the way back into the next edge. However, beware, this will not merge the two edges. To merge the edges, simply select all with A and then press M and select Merge by Distance. This will merge any vertices that are on top of each other. Cool, now we've covered all the tools, let's talk about the Properties Editor. Situated to the right of the 3D viewport, the Properties Editor has a bunch of different tabs, all with different functions. Let's take a look at some of these tabs. This orange box icon here is the Object Properties tab and is for editing values specific to the selected object, such as location, rotation, and scale. It allows for more accurate adjustments than doing it by hand. The tab below that with a blue spanner is called the Modifier Properties tab and is something that you will probably use a lot. From this tab you can add various different modifiers to change your mesh. For example, the mirror modifier, which can be found here under Generate, which will symmetrize your mesh along the center. Another useful modifier is the Subdivision surface modifier. This works by breaking down the faces in the selected object into smaller faces. This is a good way to create a mesh that you can sculpt. So let's apply it to our cube. Click Add Modifier, go into Generate and click Subdivision Surface Modifier. As you can see, it has two settings, Levels View and Render. Levels View is how it looks when editing the object in the 3D viewport. Render is for when we render the object. So if we set Render to 2 and Levels View to 1, when we render the scene by pressing F12, you'll see that the mesh looks smoother in the render than in our 3D viewport. Later in this video, we'll test some of the sculpting brushes on this mesh. For that, we need to increase the level of detail of the mesh, so increase both Levels and Render View to 5.
Then go to Object Mode.
And then click Apply. Cool, now let's go into Sculpt Mode. Sculpt Mode in Blender is like Edit mode, but instead of dealing with individual elements, vertices, edges, and faces, an area of the model is changed using brushes. Each brush has two settings, the radius, which is the size of the area that the brush affects, and the strength, which is the intensity of the brush's effect. There are a lot of brushes here. Let's look at some of the more useful ones, starting with the Draw brush. The Draw brush very simply moves vertices in or out within its radius. Like I was saying before, if we increase the radius, the stroke size will increase. If we increase the strength, the intensity of the stroke will increase.
If we change a brush from positive to negative, it will move the vertices in the opposite direction.
The grab brush is this one here. The shortcut is G, and it allows you to grab the mesh and move it around. The grab brush is incredibly useful and the brush that I use the most. The smooth brush can be used to smooth rough parts of the mesh. To show how it works, let's use it on the area we just grabbed out. The smooth brush's shortcut is S. Alternatively, you can hold Shift while sculpting. The mask brush might seem confusing at first, but it's a very important tool and something you may use a lot. The mask brush is used to create a mask that you cannot sculpt on top of, meaning if I mask this area here and then use the draw brush on top of it, it will only inflate the area around it. This is very useful when you want to freeze parts of your mesh.
The very last thing I want to talk about is how to import a reference image. Reference images are useful when editing or sculpting a mesh. The first thing you're going to want to do is to make sure you're in object mode. So get out of Sculpt mode and get into object mode. Now, to bring in a reference image, go into orthogonal view on the y-axis by clicking on the navigation gizmo like we talked about earlier. This will make sure that when we put the image in, it is straight and not on an angle. Move the 3D cursor to where you want to put the image. Press Shift A, select Image, Reference, and then navigate in your files to where the reference image is. Then click Load Reference Image. Now you can move and scale the image to where you would like it to be.
Alright, that'll be it for this video. By now you should be getting a good idea of how Blender works and how you can get started in Blender. Of course, you still have a lot to learn and a long way to go, but this tutorial should hopefully have gotten you started on your journey. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, please consider dropping a like or subscribing to see more tutorials like this.